Imagine a country that tried to stay out of the deadliest war in human history, yet suddenly found itself invaded by two of the world's most powerful armies. A nation that never officially declared war, yet became one of the most important supply routes of World War II. A place where oil, railways, and global politics collided, changing the future of an entire region. This is the hidden story of the Anglo-Soviet invasion of Iran and how Iran, despite trying to remain neutral, became one of the most strategically important countries of World War II. In the 1930s, Iran was a country undergoing dramatic transformation. The nation was ruled by Reza Shah Pahlavi, a powerful leader determined to modernize his country. He built railways, roads, factories, and a stronger military. His goal was simple: make Iran independent and powerful enough to resist foreign influence. But Iran's geography made that dream incredibly difficult. To the north lay the Soviet Union. To the south, the British Empire dominated the Persian Gulf. And beneath Iran's soil was something both superpowers desperately wanted: oil. For decades, British companies controlled much of Iran's oil industry through the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company, making the country a critical energy source for the British war machine. Yet Reza Shah wanted to reduce British influence and strengthen Iran's independence. To balance British and Soviet pressure, he began building closer economic ties with another rising power in Europe: Germany. By the late 1930s, Germany had become Iran's largest trading partner. German engineers helped build factories and railways. German technicians helped develop industry. But when World War II began in 1939, these relationships would soon create a dangerous situation for Iran. When the war erupted in Europe, Iran did what many smaller nations attempted to do. It declared neutrality. Reza Shah hoped Iran could avoid becoming involved in the conflict. At first, it seemed possible. The war was largely confined to Europe. But everything changed in 1941. That year, Operation Barbarossa began. Nazi Germany launched the largest invasion in history against the Soviet Union. Suddenly, the entire balance of power in the Middle East shifted. The Allies, especially Britain and the Soviet Union, now feared something dangerous. They worried that Germany might gain influence in Iran or even try to control its oil fields. And if that happened, the Axis powers could threaten Soviet territory from the south. Iran's neutrality suddenly looked like a strategic risk. On August 25, 1941, Iran's neutrality was shattered. British forces attacked from the south. Soviet troops invaded from the north. This coordinated military campaign became known as the Anglo-Soviet invasion of Iran. Iran's army was simply not strong enough to resist two superpowers at once. Within days, the country was overwhelmed. Iranian forces collapsed quickly, and major cities were occupied. Civilian casualties were relatively limited during the fighting, but the political consequences were enormous. Soon after the invasion, the Allies forced Reza Shah to abdicate the throne. He was sent into exile. In his place, the Allies installed his young son. Mohammad Reza Pahlavi became the new ruler of Iran. But real power during the war did not belong to him. It belonged to the occupying Allied forces. Iran had effectively become a strategic military corridor for the Allied war effort. Once the Allies controlled Iran, they transformed it into one of the most important supply routes of World War II. This route became known as the Persian Corridor. Its purpose was simple: deliver supplies to the Soviet Union. After Germany invaded the USSR, the Soviets desperately needed weapons, vehicles, food, and equipment from their Allied partners. The United States and Britain began sending enormous amounts of aid through the Lend-Lease program. But there was a problem. Many supply routes were extremely dangerous. Ships traveling through the Arctic faced German submarines and harsh weather. The Pacific route was long and complicated. But Iran offered something unique, a relatively safe land route connecting the Persian Gulf to the Soviet Union. Ships would arrive in Iranian ports. Supplies would then travel north through roads and railways, especially the Trans-Iranian Railway. From there, the equipment would reach Soviet territory. The scale of this operation was enormous. Millions of tons of weapons, vehicles, and supplies traveled through Iran during the war. In fact, nearly 45% of American aid to the Soviet Union passed through this corridor. Without Iran, supplying the Soviet Union would have been far more difficult, and the outcome of the war on the Eastern Front might have been very different. Despite its importance to the Allied war effort, the occupation created serious problems for Iran. Foreign troops controlled much of the country's infrastructure. Railways, ports, and roads were used primarily for military supplies. This disrupted Iran's economy and food distribution systems. One of the most devastating consequences was the Iranian famine of 1942 to 1943. During the Allied occupation, food shortages spread across the country. Transportation systems were heavily used for military logistics, limiting the ability to distribute food. Inflation soared, and essential goods became scarce. The famine caused widespread suffering and protests throughout Iran. Many Iranians blamed the Allied occupation for worsening the crisis. This period left deep scars in Iranian society. Despite the occupation, Iran eventually joined the Allied side officially. In 1943, Iran declared war on Germany. This decision allowed the country to participate in the newly forming international order. Iran also became an important diplomatic location during the war. In November 1943, the leaders of the Allied powers met in Tehran. This historic meeting became known as the Tehran Conference. It brought together three of the most powerful leaders in the world: Franklin Delano Roosevelt, Winston Churchill, and Joseph Stalin. At the conference, they discussed the future strategy for defeating Nazi Germany. Most importantly, they planned the Allied invasion of Nazi-occupied Europe. Operation Overlord followed months later. The fact that this conference took place in Tehran shows just how strategically important Iran had become during the war. When World War II ended in 1945, Iran expected Allied forces to leave the country. The agreement was clear. The Allies had promised to withdraw their troops within 6 months after the war ended. British forces eventually complied, but the Soviet Union delayed its withdrawal from northern Iran. This created a serious international crisis. The Soviets supported separatist movements in parts of northern Iran, including Azerbaijan. The situation became one of the first major tensions of the Cold War. Eventually, under international pressure, Soviet troops withdrew in 1946. Iran finally regained full control of its territory. But the political consequences of the war would continue to shape the region for decades. Iran is rarely discussed when people talk about World War II, yet its role was incredibly important. First, Iran's oil helped fuel the Allied war machine. Second, the Persian Corridor allowed massive amounts of supplies to reach the Soviet Union. And third, Iran became a meeting place for the Allied leaders who planned the final defeat of Nazi Germany. Without Iran, the logistics of the war might have been dramatically different. The Eastern Front, the largest battlefield in human history, might have taken a very different course. In many ways, Iran became the hidden backbone of Allied logistics. World War II was fought across continents, from the beaches of Normandy to the jungles of the Pacific. But some of its most important battles were not fought with guns or tanks. They were fought through supply lines, resources, and strategic geography. Iran was one of those places. A neutral country suddenly turned into a global military highway, a nation occupied by foreign powers, yet crucial to the Allied victory. The story of Iran during World War II reminds us that sometimes the most important roles in history are played not on the front lines, but in the shadows of the battlefield.